welcome to Sectors Up Close. I'm Elena Casas. Today we're going to discuss the market impact of the Ukraine crisis by taking a look at the consumer discretionary space. And my guest is Amy Kong, the CIO of Barrett Asset Management. Well, aside from the obvious impact on global energy security and the international payment system, the Ukraine crisis and the barrage of sanctions against Russia are impacting global supply chains and major industries, including airlines and automakers. The S&P 500 Consumer Discretionary Index includes big retailers such as Amazon and Target, car makers Ford and GM, as well as hotels such as Hilton. It was the second worst performer after banks in the week to Monday. Global automakers and other major manufacturers have already announced they're suspending sales and deliveries into Russia, while cargo ships like this one are being seized en route. Russia and Ukraine are also major exporters of raw materials, from wheat to aluminium, driving prices for many of these commodities to record highs in the past few days. Add to this mix airspace closures affecting airlines responsible for moving around 20% of the world's air cargo. Prices for air cargo were already 2.5 times pre-pandemic levels in December last year. So, how can an investor navigate this risk in the short to medium term? Let's ask Amy Kong of Barrett Asset Management. Amy, hi! Just how much of an impact are we seeing in the consumer discretionary sector from this supply chain disruption since the conflict started?
Hi, Elena. Thank you for having me. I think so far we're not seeing that much of an impact yet, but it could get worse. Right now, the headlines, as well as many investors, have been more focused on the energy sector, to your earlier comments. But certainly, what's also very important to note is that Ukraine, as well as Russia, are huge suppliers of a variety of chemical gases, as well as rare earth minerals that are very important in a number of industrial manufacturing processes. In fact, Ukraine is a huge supplier of neon gas, argon, krypton, and it actually supplies 70% of the world's neon gas. Russia is actually the largest producer of palladium. And to my earlier point, these materials are very important in a number of manufacturing processes. So I think it hasn't hit the consumer discretionary sectors yet, but I'm certain that it could have an impact in due time.
How much of an impact will this have on the sales of these companies? How significant an export market is Russia?
I think it depends on the material that we're talking about, but they are not insignificant. Let's just put it that way. And at the end of the day, as I've mentioned, I think it will disrupt the supply chain issues that we are already facing. I don't think it derails the system, but it certainly will disrupt it. To my earlier point, for example, neon gas is actually used quite commonly in the manufacturing of semiconductor chips. And so that's going to be an issue going forward. What is a silver lining in this process is that there are other producers, number one. And then two, a lot of these chip fabs have stockpiled these chemical gases. And so again, in the short run, perhaps there's enough inventory to go around. But certainly as the Ukraine situation unfolds, that again could be a headwind going forward. Same with palladium and other minerals, as I've talked about. These car manufacturers, which uses a lot of these materials, may have stockpiles at the moment, but certainly that can change.
You mentioned semiconductor chips. What other subsectors here are going to be affected?
I think autos could be an area that will see higher input costs. Palladium, which is one of the rare earth materials that I've noted, is commonly used in automobile manufacturing. In fact, it's one of the key materials that goes into the manufacturing of catalytic converters, which, as you know, is a big part of the exhaust system. And so, as that material is thinning out, certainly manufacturers will have issues sourcing that material, but at the same time, the price of that material is also moving higher quite rapidly. And so I think as sales for these automobile manufacturers will likely, stay flat, but, certainly could be disrupted because of all that's going on. The fact that expenses may move higher, again, because of the cost of manufacturing is moving higher. I think automobile manufacturers is something that I'm watching very closely. Also, which we've already seen happen last week, is a lot of these hospitality, leisure, as well as online travel agents are also weaker. And so that's another aspect that we need to pay more focused attention to. Certainly, they're not impacted because of global supply, but of course, with all that's going on, that's another area within the consumer discretionary sector that may be impacted.
Briefly, Amy, consumer discretionary was already down about 13% in the year to Monday. How much risk is already priced in here?
I think a good chunk is priced in the standpoint of, some of the global chain issues that we've talked about. It's very hard to distinguish, whether a stock's down because of that or just in light of the fact that consumer sentiment is going to be lower because of all of this. I think what is not quite priced in yet is if, let's say, oil, which we all know is likely to stay elevated for the time being, if that really prolongs into the medium term, that's really going to impact the willingness for a consumer to spend. And so I don't think that's quite priced in yet. I think right now the street is still banking that the US consumer will still spend, that household balance sheets are still healthy. And we think that's still the case. But certainly, if we're seeing oil at 100 for an extended period of time, it is going to impact consumer spending. And I don't think that is quite priced in just yet.
Thanks so much for that insight. That was Amy Kong, CIO of Barrett Asset Management. Well, before I go, let's take a look at some of the stories we're following in this fast-moving space. Russia will temporarily stop foreign investors from selling Russian assets. That's according to the country's Prime Minister, who said the move was to make sure decisions were not driven by political pressure. No further details of the order were given. Separately, Russia's huge sovereign wealth fund will also be pressed into action, spending $10 billion to buy shares in Russian companies. Russia's decision to limit asset sales comes after companies from BP to Shell announced they were divesting themselves of their Russian assets. The world's two biggest container lines on Tuesday temporarily suspended cargo shipments to and from Russia in response to Western sanctions on Moscow. Denmark's Maersk followed Swiss-based MSC in announcing a stoppage in cargo bookings to and from Russia, although both companies said the suspension would not cover essentials such as foodstuffs, medical and humanitarian supplies. And global auto and truck makers, including Volvo, Daimler and General Motors, have suspended some business in Russia. Volvo said it would suspend shipments to the Russian market until further notice, becoming the first automaker to do so. Germany's Volkswagen said it would halt production at two Germany factories after a delay in getting parts from Ukraine, while Mercedes owner Daimler said it would freeze business activities in Russia with immediate effect, including its cooperation with Russian truck maker KAMAZ. GM's announcement was mostly symbolic, as it sells only 3,000 vehicles a year in the country. And that's your look at how Ukraine is impacting the consumer discretionary sector. I'm Elena Casas, and this is Reuters.